Yeah. Well, I guess oftentimes when we talk about swimmer's shoulder, we're talking about some type of impingement, um, which ultimately leads to inflammation. And again, that inflammation can lead to pathology, which is out of my scope. So I think first and foremost, when your athletes have pain, it's really helpful and wise to partner yourself with an allied health professional that's licensed and within their scope to be, diagnosing and treating that and creating a partnership to bridge the gap between that rehab, prehab, and their strength training. But it's really common, it's the most mobile joint in the body. So a lot of freedom of movement, but also at the expense of stability. And we're looking at a lot of soft tissue to keep that stability and maintain a centered joint. And then when you look at something like swimming, which can be a repetitive stress through certain joint actions, muscle actions. If we're not balancing out some of those joint and muscle actions with the reciprocal movements, it can lead to an imbalance and lead to the joint moving out of what sometimes referred to as centration and leading to these impingements. So having which is a really good argument for your strength training on deck, your dryland training to balance out some of the repetitive stresses, the repetitive movements that you're doing in the pool.
Right. Any, and again, a general question, any one or two movements that you feel helps your clients to stay overall healthy, to cover the relationship between both the glenohumeral joint and the scapula and the scapulothoracic region, right? And how do we take care of these positions safely? You have one or two movements that you like doing or building on with variations?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity to get away from generalizations and be more specific. And I follow a lot of Eric Cressy's work with baseball, with baseball players, particularly pitchers and throwing or overhead athletes. And he often refers to how, like, a team shouldn't just have an arm care program. Each individual should have their own specific arm care program. And getting into the nuances of athletes and individual static and dynamic postures and taking a look at all the things you just referenced from their thoracic position relative to their scapulas, relative to their shoulders, and then relative to the length tension relationships of the muscles on those joints and on those bones, and what each individual is presenting, and then giving them specific work to address some of the imbalances that I was alluding to. But I think it could be more specific and not just generally calling it swimmer's shoulder or shoulder impingement. There's a lot of nuances to those things, but very complex area, as I was saying before. And I think the approach could be more specific by just taking a more of a closer look and individualizing it a bit.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have talked before, it's like, all right, well, what happens when we work with teams? you know, Using an assessment process, I think we can bucket those teams into, different groups and have those groups be focused on different movement prep, different, homework, prehab, whatever you want to call it. Um, but making it more targeted to their specific needs.
Yeah. One thing that you did mention here that I think is important, because I love Eric Cressy and what he's doing with baseball, and he's really going out of the scope and truly digging in almost like a physical therapist on the anatomy of things. And I like that. I mean, baseball has a lot of shoulder issues, and what he's been doing to create programs for his baseball players and even other athletes are it's incredible. I'm completely with you. But you did mention static and dynamic posture. Explain to the listeners here who may hear this for the first time: static versus dynamic posture. What's different between them, and how do we train them differently?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, taking a look at maybe the resting tone and the position that an athlete might assume, and we can make some judgments or assumptions based on that. So, you know, we're all familiar with like, maybe the layman's term of posture, but like, how are they standing? And then taking a look at how the spine is influenced by that. And then how do my shoulder blades sit on my spine and are they
Yep.
symmetrical left or right? And, there's some certain like anatomical standards we look at when or that people will fall into when we observe that. And then taking a look at some of the resting tone of the muscles around those joints, those bones. But that's not the whole picture because how do people move? Someone might assume one posture, but are they able to move through the ranges of motion that they're, anatomically, that they should be anatomically? And then do the muscles, influence those range of motion the way they should, in both the static position, so not moving at all, but also dynamic, like can they move through those positions?